Welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I'm Bob Arnold, President here at DRJ. We thank you for your attendance today and we hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. Everyone's phone has been muted and we ask you to utilize the question panel you'll find on the right hand side of your screen. Our speakers today will attempt to answer as many of these as possible at the end of today's session. Today's sponsor is MetricStream. Today's topic is incorporating business continuity management into organizational risk management strategies. Our speakers today are Michael Redmond and Vivav Agarwal. Ms. Redmond is CEO and lead consultant at Redmond Worldwide. She is a certified project manager, certified business recovery planner, certified emergency manager, and holds 2 international master level certifications in business continuity. Michael is certified also in ISO 22301 and is a certified instructor. She specializes in cyber incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery, and emergency management. Ms. Redmond is a consultant, author, international speaker, and trainer. Mr. Agarwal leads the marketing efforts for the social media GRC and technology marketing offerings within MetricStream. He has 11 years of experience primarily in strategic consulting, sales, and marketing, and global implementations. He has been associated with the strategy and ERP consulting practice for multiple firms, as well as heading implementations of risk management software across many internet and social media firms. With no further introductions, I'd like to turn the mic over to Michael.
Thank you, Bob. Welcome, everyone. Well, as you can see, we're just talking today about incorporating business continuity management. Let me start on the cover sheet here. In the 70s, there was disaster recovery. Disaster recovery was to take care of the technology. The data centers were up and running. Everything was wonderful. And then a company actually had a disaster. And the CEO wanted to know, true story, wanted to know why they weren't able to recover the business. They said, well, we brought up the data center. No one expected the business to be out at the same time. So that's when business continuity started back in the 1980s. And it became very separate. In the 1990s, business continuity and DR together were called business continuity management. And that worked fine. But then there were situations that came up in the year closer to year 2000, where we had 9/11, we had Katrina. We had a lot of emergency situations that were popping up a lot more than companies were prepared for. So business continuity management became business continuity, disaster recovery, and part of emergency management. Well, then, recently, in this decade, situations occurred where there were cyber events. Now, years ago, we had information security. You worried about somebody being able to get into your papers. You worried about maybe putting a device on the side of your building and getting into your servers and such. But it wasn't the same as today. So today, we say business continuity management. We're including the disaster recovery, the business continuity, the emergency management, and part of that is dealing with cyber issues. So what happens to keep a business out of work? Now, we're not talking cybersecurity, but we are talking about issues such as denial of service that could affect your business being in operation, could affect you have a cyber attack and they have to take applications down that now causes the BCP DR plans to work. So that's what we're talking about today in a nutshell. So what we'll be speaking about is the business continuity strategy. It's a major part of risk management. Now, risk management includes many other areas. Risk management also includes financial risk, stock risk, a lot of other areas. Those are going to be outside of today's presentation, except for the fact that we will be talking about when your business is down and not working, your stock usually goes down with it. And when you recover quite well, like NatWest did after their fire many years ago, when companies first started saying, this affects our stock prices, because their stock went up the week they had a fire, because they could prove they were able to recover. So we'll be covering some of that. We'll go through how to do a risk assessment, how to do the impact analysis, the way it's being done today. And there are some changes. And now, just to give some high-level introductions, Business Continuity Institute, BCI, who I used to teach for, used to say that they did the impact analysis first and then the risk assessment. Disaster Recovery Institute used to say that they did the risk assessment first and then the impact analysis. Well, ISO says you do the risk assessment first and then the impact analysis. So it seems to be more the trend that people are working with, and BCI has also changed to come up with that. So forgive me if I'm repeating things that you already know. I'm trying to level scope this so that when we go on, I'm not too advanced for someone, and yet at the same time I don't want to go too basic for people who have been doing this for a very long time. So we'll be discovering recovery metrics and risk mitigation strategies that people can use to modify the risk, business processes, and those functions. And let's talk about that a little bit before I get into that. Once you've identified your risk, you have to figure out what your critical business processes are. Those are going to come from a series of which departments bring the most money, which departments affect public image, which departments you actually need to have up. Now, in a disaster mode, you're probably not going to be bringing up marketing, but you will absolutely be bringing up public relations and social media marketing, or social media communications. So it is changing today than it was even 10 years ago. We didn't have to worry about a firm being down and at the same time being attacked on Facebook or on Twitter because they were down. Today it's very different. So we're talking about the new ways of doing a risk assessment to take into the year 2015 issues. There's a broader risk mitigation approach, which we're talking about now, many more mitigation. People have denial of service plans. The FBI said today in a release that an interview that was actually out there that they know before that was just, all right, fine, a firm wanted to pay for denial of service, and most companies pay for denial of service because they give, if you pay the money, they will give you a code and you can get out of it. Today they're telling people to try to use their denial of service continuity plans in place from a business continuity point of view, and then let the cyber people or the cybersecurity incident response teams work with the technology portion of trying to undo everything. So this was in the FBI, but that doesn't mean that your firm has to agree. This is what best practices are. So that's where your risk assessments come in on the new 215 risk. So if you're still using the same risk assessment you used 5 years ago, that doesn't work. So we'll be covering this in detail. So let's talk about business sustainability. Now that gives you a quick level set introduction. Well, we know that the organizations have to plan ahead of time for business sustainability. This plans that allow you to wing it, we'll figure it out as we go, we do this all the time, it doesn't work. Now, a part of this is business continuity, which we discussed, the business side of the house, getting your business operations back in place, disaster recovery, getting your technology back in place, and your networks. Now, continuity is interesting. That's a new term that's come up. When people say continuity, they kind of mean everything together. It's become a covered-all term. We have a continuity plan, which basically, to some managers, means we can cover anything that happens. So that's an interesting approach, and that's kind of where people looking at business continuity management are. It's not business recovery. It's not disaster recovery, but it's continuity. Risk management is part of this process. Information security. And I didn't add cybersecurity. Shame on me. Cybersecurity is separate from information security. Anybody that's on the phone that's in a bank, it used to be you could look at FFIEC for the banking regulations, FFIEC.gov for those of you who are not in banking. I highly recommend you use that as a checkoff list for how to deal with risk. It has an audit section there for business continuity, an audit section for disaster recovery, an audit section for information security, and as of last April or May, has Section J, which has an audit section on how to deal with your cyber issues that might affect the continuity. So it's a great guideline. I highly recommend it. It's a good tool to use. So the question I'm going to ask you right now, and I'll ask you to answer yourselves, is are you prepared? Are you prepared to the point that if you lost your building, the business would not be impeded? If you lost your data center, would you not be impeded? If you lost your utilities, would you be okay? What if you lose them all at once? Are you okay? What if you have a other event that prevents the business from functioning? Could be people outside having a strike, not letting people in. Are you okay? These are the key questions to wonder about and to try to figure out on the answers. So let's talk about some of the industry examples of things that have happened. For those of you who are in my age group, there are the old things, 9/11. One of the things I'm very proud of is the fact that using the methodologies that are out there, that are best practices, on 9/11, all 10 firms that I planned for, all 10, were back in business within 24 hours. That means they had a place to go, they had a hot site, all of the personnel knew where they were supposed to be, whether they were supposed to be at a hot site, whether they were supposed to be at home working remotely. They knew when to come in. We planned it well. We planned for loss of facilities, we planned for loss of transportation, loss of bridges, all worst case scenario. Katrina was a different type of disaster because what happened was the firms who did all the same type of planning didn't realize that their employees were going to all be losing their homes that day too. At 9/11, a lot of lives were lost. In Katrina, not only were a lot of lives lost, but the employees that were left were impeded because they had nowhere to live, no facilities. So firms who had their business continuity plans there had to scramble. And they set up washing machines for families to do their laundry. They set up alternative housing for their employees. That was their emergency management plan. So now that they're intermingled within the business continuity. How do we deal with our people? How does emergency management, what do we deal with this? How do we deal with the business and the people at the same time? Recently, we've had Sandy. Sandy was affecting mostly Staten Island and upstate New York. But again, people lost their homes. They weren't able to come into work. Lives were lost. Business were lost. I believe it was Citibank that was out of their main building for 9 months. Major impediment. They had to be able to recover not for 30 days on a business continuity site, but 90 days. That means they had to be relocated. So does your planning include relocation of your firm for up to a year? The Oklahoma tornadoes recently, the cyber attacks, denial of service, Anthem. Well, you can say that's just a business continuity thing. Well, it's not. Look at Target. Some of the stores weren't able to function. People lost their credit cards, PCI, and such. And again, these are issues that are becoming new and part of the continuity. Business continuity has changed. So let's talk about some standards that I recommend you look at. I would look at ISO 3100, which is the risk management. I would look at ISO 27001, which is getting into some of your cyber. But what's interesting, I didn't put on here ISO 27035, which is incident response. It deals with some business continuity, some DR, and some cyber. It's all becoming one area now, but the planning processes are different, of course, but they're considered all responding to an incident. So ISO 22301 is strictly the business continuity and DR. But what's happening is organizational risk management. Organizational risk management today has to decide what the risks are of the organization. Not the department, but the organization first. Is it their image the most important? Is it loss of funds? Qualitative, quantitative for the entire organization, then break it down. So why do I look at ISO? ISO are international standards made up of over 640 different countries. And they've agreed that these are the standards that firms and organizations should work by. Are there other functions you have to look at also? Yes. If you're in the United States, it's NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology. You've got to look at your normal regulations, your normal processes, your normal, if you're in finance, you have the FFIEC and Basel Accord and many other regulations, which we won't get too much into now, but they're important to know. You want to make sure you have mitigation plans in place. What can we do? Now, 3100 is risk management. So if you're doing business continuity, if you're traditional business continuity, traditional DR, then these are the two that I recommend you read and understand and know. These are important. So let's talk about some strategies. Now I'm saying business continuity and enterprise risk management. Enterprise risk management includes the old term of what we used to call business continuity management, but enterprise risk now is expanded to include stock, to include anything that might affect the firm's image is under enterprise risk. So the world terms are changing. But no matter what you call them, I'm not going to go through and break them out. Now we've had our introductions. No matter what you call them, we'll just call it business continuity for the rest of the presentation, if I have permission to do so. But they all have a business goal. What is the business's goals as a whole? Do you know that? Is everyone working, though you're doing your planning separately, or does everybody understand the exact same business goal? Let's take an insurance company. Is their business goal to stay in business, or is their business goal to generate new customers, or is their business goal to be able to facilitate all of their customers in time of disaster to make sure that they are all covered with insurance and that their customers don't have to wait a minute to get their insurance checks just because that insurance company underwent a disaster. So what are their real business goals? Not what they tell the marketing. What's their real business goal? What is it? You want to define an overall recovery objective. We want the entire business to be back in 24 hours. Ideally, that's not going to happen. You may have some departments back in 24 hours, but it's pretty hard to bring an entire organization back in 24 hours unless you have a totally another facility that can house all of your employees, and you have a separate data center running and such, and very few organizations afford or want to spend that. So what's a realistic recovery objective? Now we'll break it down to BCP and DR in a little while. But what is the recovery objective for the firm? Well, you're going to get that from the Chief Financial Officer, Chief Emergency Management, and you should have a business continuity management team that meets, made up of cyber, made up of business continuity recovery, made up of disaster recovery, made up of your emergency management. And I'm going to add in crisis psychology. If you have a crisis psychology team, some firms simply bring other individuals in at time of disaster to work with the people, and that's fine. But I recommend having a crisis psychology plan. If you're connected to me on LinkedIn, if you go to my page, you'll see some of these. I have 22 to 23 papers I've written on these different subjects, and you're welcome to look at them. If you're not, and you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please make sure you put in Michael, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, middle initial C, Redmond, R-E-D-M-O-N-D. But please make sure you do the C or you're not going to get me. So you want to look at your risk frame mitigation approaches. And now you're going to bring that up separately. What can we mitigate for disaster recovery? What can we mitigate from a DR point of view? What can we mitigate for emergency management, etc.? Well, what you can mitigate, first of all, for everyone, is knowing where everybody's going to go regardless of the situation. You can mitigate by having your network alternative plans put in place by having companies out there that can actually help, such as VeriSign is a company that has programs that they can monitor your networks. There's Verizon has a denial of service program that you can actually go on. If you have denial of service, you can actually utilize their networks for part of it, so for key applications, so that you're not being limited. So there's a lot of vendors out there that didn't exist years ago. And that's important to look at. What's different? What's new? What are new vendors out there? So if you're not up to speed on them and what the new products and services are, I recommend that you all get together so that you're not all looking, bringing in companies. I've gone into companies as a consultative audit and seen that there are 6 or 7 different groups. Business continuity has their vendors, DR has theirs. Everybody's contracted separately, and sometimes different companies that do the same thing. It's chaos. So there needs to be a risk management point of view that's an overview looking at how to deal with these issues. So let's talk about some key areas before you start. You want to look at the scope of the plan. Which area is it actually covering? Are you covering one building? Are you covering several different countries? Are you covering certain departments? Are you covering certain other areas? What's under the scope of the plan? Normative reference is, where does the business lay normally? How much does it normally make? Where do most people work from? Do they have a lot of people that are currently remoting in? Do they have other people that are not remoting in? What's normal right now? So you want to understand the organization, including determine the scope of the management system. Well, do you have business continuity plans in place, DR plans in place, emergency management plans in place, crisis psychology plans, cybersecurity incident response? Are these all in place? Can they work together, and where's the connectivity between them? How does the traditional BC recovery and disaster recovery get alerted when there's going to be an emergency coming up, when people are expecting a hurricane, when they're expecting a tornado? Are they told ahead of time? Do they get coordination ahead of time to maybe be an alert? How are these things done? When cybersecurity gets something, they realize they're going to have to take down 6 or 7 different servers because they've been in applications on them are infected, or the databases are infected. Is BCP alerted before they're taken down? Do you get to discuss that? So all of this has to be coordinated ahead of time. The reason I'm bringing this up is because many firms have had recent disasters, different situations that are cyber-related, and found out BCP-DR wasn't even notified. Of course, they found out when the applications weren't working, but they could have been notified ahead of time. So you need to coordinate all of this. So you want to understand what management wants. Again, is it management's public image very important? Well, then you need to make sure that you have really good social media people out there. You need to make sure that you have really good press conferences set up there ahead of time. So what is there that they're most concerned about? The money, the stockholders, the public image, their clients? What is the priority? Now, please, I'm not saying the clients aren't important, but sometimes in order to get clients, is it to maintain existing clients or generate new? It makes a difference on how they approach it. So leadership roles, responsibilities, and authorities. Now, this becomes a major issue under the new terminology for business continuity management. Who's in charge? BCP, DR, cyber, emergency management? Who's in charge? These are major, major, major decisions today. That's why I have all my circles here interlocking. Somebody's got to be in charge. And that needs to be decided ahead of time into what situation, who's going to be there. So when you're planning the objectives and plans to achieve them, they interface. Where do you interlock with others? Where do you go? I went to a company not too long ago when I was working with a disaster recovery team doing a gap analysis of their plan. And I said, well, what does the business say they need for the recovery time objectives? They said, I don't know. I said, how did the DR decide when they're bringing back the applications? They said, well, we did it. We really know it. They had never looked at the fact that the business continuity people had done a risk assessment and impact analysis, and they hadn't coordinated. The business continuity people had no idea. They submitted their RTOs and RPOs and everything else, and the DR team said, okay, fine. We can't meet those because our technology won't allow us to meet those short deadlines. So this is the best we can do, and this is their new RTO. But they never got that information back to the business unit. This was recently. So please don't think that this is something from the dark ages. This was recently. So please double check everything. So what do you support? Who really knows what's happening? Who's aware of this communication? How do you deal with these issues? And most important, do the executives understand the new business continuity management? Are they aware of all the interlocking areas? So let's talk about your continuity, what's included. You need a data criticality analysis. This is interesting because when you do your data criticality analysis, it's looking at, you have to do that from 3 different areas. Your business continuity side, when they need it up and running. You have to do it from your disaster recovery side, what they can actually do. And you have to look at it from your cyber side as far as what has PHI, public health information, on those servers, what has PCI information for credit cards on those servers, what has PII, public information on those servers, because for cyber, that is going to be what they need to bring back first and protect the PHI and PII. Well, for the business side, they may need another application that's absolutely more important because it generates tremendous income. And so you have to look at those together, the BCP, the DR, and the cyber, and coordinate, and that's your data criticality analysis. And you'll still have your RTO and RPO in your tier 1, 2, and 3, 4 possibly for BCP and DR, and cyber's still going to have theirs, what they consider their high priority, such, but you need somewhere in between. What happens, you may have to reorganize your disaster recovery, you may have to reorganize how they have their servers organized. You certainly don't want to have all of your PHI information on one server. That server, you would lose all your PHI in one day. So do you know which applications have PHI, which have PCI, which ones interface with those databases? And now BCP and DR need to start asking that in their risk assessment. Your data backup plan, that becomes different. I spoke to an insurance company recently that was required to have records going back for 50 years after a person died. That had to be backed up. It was a requirement. There was a cyber issue recently where somebody was down. They had to go back 4 months of backups because it turns out they had malware on that for 4 months. That database was no longer usable. And their backups only went 3. So now you're looking at data backup plans very differently than you had to look at before. Emergency response is pretty much the same. You're dealing with emergencies, you're dealing with response, and emergency response is part of BCP, business continuity planning, but you also have an emergency recovery plan, which is part of your emergency management teams that deals with life safety issues. Your business continuity plan, getting back to business, your contingency testing plan. Now, this is interesting because the contingency testing plan has changed. The contingency testing plan now includes joint test, BCP, DR, cyber, emergency management, etc. So your contingency plan is recovery and reconstituting of the IT systems. It should include continuity of operations plans, business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans. So we know that. An incident response plan is reporting and managing computer security incidents. Well, that's what NIST says. it says it's computer security incidents. ISO 27035 says that it is BCP, DR, have incident response. So I really wish that NIST and ISO would come closer together, but these are some of the things. So ISO, it's ISO 800-84 is probably the one that you're going to want to reference. But so let's look at some of those tests. The tests that you want to have will be different types of tests. You want to do training, you want to do your exercises, but you'll want to find some way to at least do, we'll have a tabletop test, but a functional test for all of them. How do they interrelate? Where do the teams, the procedures, the assets, where are you using the same people? You can't have the same disaster recovery team, possibly, because cyber may be having an event at the same time. You may lose half of your technology team in cyber support. So who has who? Who owns who? What if somebody's on your team, they can't be on two teams. So this is becoming different. So it's contingency testing now, as opposed to business continuity, opposed to DR. It's contingency testing all together. Your disaster recovery plan, your crisis management plan, your cybersecurity incident response plan, which is totally separate. It's done totally different, and we're not getting into that today. That's another subject. So these are your joint steps. You want to do joint exercise and testing. You want to know how you're going to deal with disruptive events, and now you have to do a risk assessment based on what could affect the entire organization. You know, the banks in Greece, looking at enterprise risk, global risk, were not planning on having a financial crisis. Now, those of us in the U.S. certainly remember what happened here between 2007 and 2009, and we can relate to that. So how do we deal with those? How do we deal with those situations as part of this process? We don't cause that as part of our recovery process. So regular review of the plans and business continuity arrangements jointly. You want to measure the plans. You want to have metrics in place. So across the board, I'm going to take all of them now, just whether you're using BCP, DR, whichever one you're using. You want to assess the risk and the impacts. You want to architect solutions. In some cases, many cases now, I do enterprise risk management solutions where I come across, I actually chart them all out, and I say, this is where we can combine resources. This is where I need to separate resources. So I implement my mitigation, implement recovery solutions, and mitigation may be dealing with cyber issues such as denial of service, maybe if they have a ransomware attack where someone is saying we're not going to release this website, and you are a company that does all your business on the website, well, now you have an issue. So how do you deal with that? Do you have an alternate website that you can switch to? Do you have alternate shopping carts set up that they can use? How is this dealt with? So these are key issues to look at. So you want at least do a functional test together. You want to look at, in setting controls, I would recommend in setting your controls, you develop a comprehensive policy for the entire organization across the board. You identify roles and responsibilities across the board. You establish an override schedule for how often you're going to meet. Maybe it's once a month. It doesn't need to be that often. But, you know, what's changed? Sort of, I do recommend for people in traditional BCP and DR that you are meeting at least once a week with your change management. Now you're going to need to do all of your teams together. So you want to develop a comprehensive policy that deals with all of these issues under your setting controls. The purpose, the effective date, the objectives, the ability and scope, the authorities, related policies, all of the regulations that you're following, all the standards you're following, so everybody knows what they are. You want to establish, design different events together, have documentation together. So what you're doing is phase one, you're designing your new across-the-board planning. You're developing your across-the-board planning, you're conducting it, and you're evaluating it. You're still having separate plans, but you also need an overall management plan. So this is becoming a whole nother process. And by the way, if you are going to look at NIST, for those of you, you'll want to look at NIST, some of them. NIST 850 is building information. 816 is dealing with some of your training requirements, and there's quite a few out there. So I'm just giving you some at random. This is not to cover those. These are just off the top of my head. So you want to examine evidence about performance of activities. You want to verify measures and evaluate the quality. Have a general template that works for interfacing. How does your BCP, DR, cyber, et cetera, how do you work across the board? You want to plan the strategy as an integral part of risk management strategy. So work with your risk managers, work with legal, work with compliance. New area now. Compliance has always been important, but now it's even more important. PHI, PCI, PII, it's affecting everything, especially for those in DR and backup and strategies and areas. So you want to conduct a risk assessment at BIA to identify critical business processes and the high priority risk, looking across the board. You want to develop metrics. How do we know what's high? How do we know what's medium? How do we know what's low? What critical business processes do we have that absolutely must be up and running no matter what? You want to embed a risk mitigation approach. You want to integrate the recovery strategies, put into BCP, into your risk management framework. Do sort of a review now. You're going to obtain management support. You're going to prepare for your project. You're going to identify requirements. You're going to define the scope. And this is just a review. You've got your management intention, responsibilities. You're implementing support procedures. You're identifying your risk. You're identifying your priorities and objectives. You're determining the priorities. By the way, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to look at this again later, or be able to hear this again later. So required resources, define mitigation recovery procedures, and perform training and awareness programs. Got to exercise and test jointly. Be able to deal with all types of disruptive events. Review your plans and measure your program. We talked about ISO 22301, which is business continuity. The main things are perform an internal audit. What's going on? Where are your gaps? What does management feel? And are you going to certify? Are you going to go ISO certified? That's up to you. If you don't want to go ISO certified, still use it as a guide. Ask audit to use it as a guide. You want to pre-plan your exercises, and this is just a review. You're coordinating the exercises, you're evaluating, you're exercising, you're documenting, you're documenting. You're evaluating, you're updating, and you're reporting to management. Management's got to be involved every step of the way, more than they ever have. 1974 Farm Corrupt Act states that officers can be held liable for not taking care of the contingencies of their firm. Well, no one has gone to prison yet. But it did say that they could have up to 6 months imprisonment, and it did say they could have fines. But things are going to start to change. People are getting very scared today. More firms are closing, more organizations are happening. They want to see that people have done their due diligence. So you want to review documentation, sit in plan testing, look at mock scenarios, and verify that there's a budget. And at this point in time, I've completed my review. I've completed my presentation. I'm 1 minute early, and I'm going to take that minute and while we're switching over. And I would like to present Vibhav. Now Vibhav is with Metric Stream, and as his presentation, we'll go now a little more into how to take what I've gone, and he'll be bringing that over to the next step. So Vibhav, when you're ready, you can start.
Thank you, Michael, for the nice segue into the importance of business continuity and the key measures and the key frameworks and basically the steps that an organization needs to take in order to ensure that business continuity is not dealt with in an isolated manner, but is seen as a part of the overall enterprise risk management strategy. And good morning, everyone. My name is Vibhav Agarwal, and over the next 20 so minutes, I would like to basically build upon what Michael has just spoken and give you a little bit more insights into how here we at Metric Stream are, seeing this BCM paradigm evolve. Starting with the most important thing and the most important change that we are seeing in the market today, and it's obviously that this world is now the age, is moving into the age of the customer. Today, the customers are ruling the roost when it comes to driving business strategies, when it's in terms of driving business revenue, and also in terms of basically driving the whole thought leadership process within a given business. And the key difference between what was the scenario earlier and what was the scenario right now is that in this age of the customer is always on. The customer is looking at your website 24/7. Customer is looking for an experience which is available on his mobile phone, which is available on the website, which is also available in case he walks into your store, and which is basically a similar experience. So what does that mean, and why am I talking about it in a BCM webinar? Well, the flip side of it is equally important. The fact that your website will be down for even 20 minutes, the fact that your website or your store is not able to, deliver the goods to the customer in that time frame that is required to, or is what is stipulated, is going to have a very big dire consequence on your business. And nothing, precipitated this fact more, nothing illustrated this fact more than what happened about 6-7 months ago in Sony cyber attack. Well, it was, in a sense, just a cyber attack that happened. But it shut down the complete computer system and network of Sony for more than a week. It, canceled a movie that was going to be released. A lot of documents which were containing PII and SSL were leaked. And I think there have not been any lawsuits since then, but then it is still a monumental loss. And some of the things that Sony people, the CEO of Sony, Michael Linton, said at that time, alluded to the fact that there was no preparation, there was no advanced planning, there was no risk assessment that was done for this. He said, we are a canary in the coal mine, that's for sure. There is no playbook for this. So you're, in a sense, trying to look at the situation as it unfolds and make decisions without being able to do a lot of experiences in the past. Now, this is exactly the reason that we want the organizational business continuity strategy in the age of the customer to be linked to the enterprise risk management strategy. This is exactly the reason why we need to, have the board of an organization think of business continuity as a critical part of enterprise risk management, of being able to ensure that the organization is able to deliver value to its customers, to its vendors, and to its extended enterprise on a continuous basis. So in a sense, what we're talking about here is having some kind of a convergence. And convergence is basically not only going to be in terms of business continuity and just risk management, but as Michelle was pointing out, business continuity, risk management, crisis management, and cybersecurity risk management, all of these essentially need to come together in what we at Metric Stream see as business resilience, a framework for business resilience, which is something that we anticipate is going to shape up in companies over the next 3 or 4 years. And this is exactly the reason that we think embedding and considering business continuity rather than as a separate, checklist-based assessment, which is done once in a year annually at some of the facilities, and is just to make auditors happy, is not going to cut the is not going to be enough going forward. And what businesses will need is a consolidated, converged approach between business continuity, risk management, cybersecurity risk management, and crisis management. Uh, why is this again important? I just want to re-emphasize that fact in my next slide, in which I'm going to show you some of the strategic objectives that is going to be common across all companies, whether across all geographies. So here you see every company has this objective of winning new customers, serving the customers, and retaining customers, and they translate into business objectives, which are related to gaining the customer intelligence, ensuring that there is a constant value delivery, there is business agility, there is customer experience, which is uniform channels, and so on and so forth. And if you see the governance, risk, and compliance layer at the top, which basically needs to ensure that the risks that are associated with these business objectives are mitigated, you would see that there is a clear connection between, when we talk about the IT controls that need to be in place to protect the customer intelligence, to protect any misuse of their data, to the link continuity objectives that need to be in place in order to ensure that there is no process failure, there is no issue with respect to continuous value delivery, and obviously going to the fact of enterprise risk management to ensure that there are no regulatory failures, there are no massive issues around data breach and things like that. So what I want to bring about this slide is that this convergence, whether you like it or not, is actually started to happen from a customer perspective. And again, whether organization likes it or not, they would need to think of the IT security program, the cyber security program, the business continuity program uh, in a little more holistic manner and think of integrating it along with the enterprise risk management program. Just before we talk about the things that basically will lead to this kind of a program, I just want to highlight some of the key trends which we are seeing across the world, which are leading to this kind of a convergence. Basically, these trends are what are leading to the fact that organizations need to think a little and take a little more holistic approach towards managing, their complete governance, risk, and compliance needs, which includes business continuity as well. The first one is, I think, well known to everybody. I don't think I need to speak about it, globalization. So today you have an extended ecosystem of your suppliers, of your vendors, of your customers, which are across countries. And you need to ensure that all of these are there to, uh, they are available for you to deliver value constantly to your customers. Uh, from a board perspective, management has started demanding a 360-degree view of the risk. So they do not only want to know the operational risk, but they also want to know the business continuity risk. They also want to know whether cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities are, getting assessed and getting, you know, factored into the business continuity exercises and things like that. And most importantly, the tolerance time for these kind of disasters is shrinking rapidly. I mean, we've already talked about the fact that in this age of the customer, you cannot afford to have your website or your value delivery mechanism down for more than a nanosecond. Anything more than that is going to adverse your revenue, uh, is going to impact your revenue adversely, and is going to have a major impact or even the reputation and the brand of the product in the market. Target was a classic example of something like that happening, and ultimately I think it's both the CEO and the CIO who had to put in their papers. Coordination, right? Another major thing, I think Michael just touched upon that as well. Among various teams within the company, among even teams outside the company, given the fact that social media is so powerful these days, news is all over the channels within a few seconds, is critical. And again, this is something that we cannot just do if we look at business continuity in isolation. And the fifth point obviously comes out of the fourth point itself, that the impacts that are there as a result of all these things are some things that cascade down and lead to uncertain consequences very quickly. I mean, when the whole Sony cyber attack thing was playing out, I don't think they anticipated that their network will actually go down for so much time, and they will actually end up paying salaries to employees by with, checks and things like that. Right. So why is this thing not happening then? I mean, it seems so very intuitive. It seems so very there. I mean, convergence is definitely challenging. This is not so easy. The fact that your organizations are global right now, you have a business unit sitting at different locations, the processes, the regional requirements, the data, the policies, the regulations across all these different regions are different. They lead to the fact that there is a very, very siloed reporting and monitoring of data. There is a different kind of a process that is followed in each of the different business entities. And that's why, bringing all these things into a common ground and rolling them up into a centralized business continuity plan, into a monitoring process, and ultimately linking it with enterprise risk management is a big challenge. And this is something that, as we speak to organizations globally, we are still seeing a very, very siloed kind of an approach that is very specific to a given country, or that is very specific to a given regulation. That is more prevalent than the other approach, which is centering around convergence, which is centering around the fact that you're looking at holistic enterprise risk management based approach. Uh, how do basically assess whether it's a successful convergence? And a successful convergence is basically a very, very quick response to events, being able to provide business continuity and resilience and threat management, within no time. Having your policies, having your procedures, having employees clearly empowered with their roles, what exactly is going to happen, the steps need to be very clear. From a risk management perspective, these steps need to take into account the risk appetite that the organization can have, a very proactive approach in terms of understanding and remediating known threats and vulnerabilities, streamlined control mechanisms, and most importantly, a common taxonomy, a common language that is spoken around enterprise risk management and business continuity management. And obviously the fact that this is not a one-time process. It's not a process that you can set one time and just forget about it. There will be always a need to look at continuous improvement, to look at sourcing data from newer communities, and basically, if not quarterly, at least looking at an yearly evaluation and improvement plan for this kind of a process. Right, and this is what we call a maturing BCP ERM program, and we have sort of identified the 3 steps in which I think each organization can classify their ERM and BCP programs. And the first step is obviously where the maximum organizations are, in which case the fragmented, completely dissociated process between BCP and ERM. It's a very, very reactive process wherein the steps start being taken only when there is a issue and it's declared to be a crisis or it is declared to be a BCP situation. The second is obviously a little more aggregated, prioritized view, what I spoke about, that both these teams speak a common language, at least in terms of the key assets, the key processes, the risk assessments around those, the RPOs and the RTOs are well aligned with those risk assessments, the threats, the employees, the vendors, the regulatory impact, all those are aligned around those processes and assets, and that is an aggregated, prioritized view available to both the enterprise risk manager, who is looking at it from a continuous risk assessment perspective, as well as the BCP manager, who is looking at it from a business continuity perspective. And obviously, this is what ultimately can become an intelligent system, an optimized system, wherein you have a best-in-class, continuously improving kind of a process, which I alluded to in my previous slide. And obviously, these things are not some things that can, transform in a system or in an organization in a very small amount of time. So over the next, 3 or 4 slides, I'm just going to show you some critical competencies that basically need to be built. And the first competency is obviously creating this whole culture of risk awareness. I mean, uh, uh, this is what we are starting to call the risk-adjusted performance and the risk-adjusted business continuity. So the whole organization needs to understand the funda of risk and, clearly understand what the organizational risk appetite, what are the key thresholds around each process, each asset from a business continuity standpoint, what is the level of performance that is required, and so on and so forth. The second part of, I'm sorry, I think I'm still on the first slide, so I'll just talk about the first part a little bit more. I think what's very important here is the fact that there needs to be a proactive decision making, which is across crisis management, business continuity management, and disaster recovery. There is a whole process on figuring out how the performance is linking to decision cycles and how decision cycles are rolling down to processes and assets, and how we are calculating the RPOs and RTOs related to those processes. The second and the most critical part, after you have developed some kind of a common risk culture, is basically having an alignment in terms of policies, procedures, and roles. So basically, whether it's a global conflict or a local conflict, everybody needs to know their roles. Everybody needs to understand what is the process that they will be responsible for, and ensuring the fact that whenever a crisis like this happens, the organization is well prepared, and all that, and basically that can be done only if there are regular BCP tests that are provided, and there is an assessment from a risk perspective on how they basically were able to fare on that BCP test and things like that. The third competency which we are talking about here is obviously around speaking a common language, and I've already spoken about it in some way. The point is that people should be able to contextualize the risk. People should be able to understand this risk is what is emanating from this process, this asset, this location, these people. And, it is important to be understood both from an ERM perspective, because an organization obviously needs a robust enterprise risk management program, and that is also required to be understood from a BCP perspective, because ultimately, if an issue happens, an organization needs to recover, the recovery needs to happen within the certified or the designated RPO and RTO, and otherwise business is going to suffer some of the irreparable ramifications and things like that. So moving on to the fourth competency, and I think we are running out of time, so I'm going to just hurry up here, is basically creating some kind of a 360-degree enterprise-wide view, wherein all the key stakeholders have some kind of a global view into what basically is available as a part of the ERM and BCP plans, and that is something very important in order to ensure that all of them are looking at the same picture when it comes to understanding and executing the plan. The fifth is obviously the orchestration with this whole thing, which is really the nirvana, wherein you are able to understand and create opportunities. You are able to improve the operational synergies between these processes and create some kind of a very, very mature BCP plan within the organizational ecosystem. It is something that will take a lot of time for organizations to get, but I think at MetricStream we are pretty sure that this is going to happen only if they look at ERM and BCP in conjunction. Just before we end, a quick note about MetricStream. We are the industry leader in enterprise governance, risk and compliance solutions, and business continuity management happens to be one of our key solutions in which Gartner has rated us very well. We have global partners, about 1,700 employees, headquartered in Palo Alto, California, and are currently backed by leading global venture capitalists such as Goldman Sachs. Do visit our website at www.metricstream.com for further information about our products. And with this, I would like to hand it over back to Bob. Uh, Bob, over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks to both our speakers here today. We did run out of time. We ran a little long here today, so there were several questions submitted. I'll make sure we get those questions over to the presenters, and they can follow up directly with anyone that submitted any questions here today. Any parting words today here, Michael or Vibhav?
I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you, Bhav. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for my side as well. Thanks to the audience for patiently listening in, and thanks to DRJ for hosting such a wonderful webinar.
Wonderful. Thanks again, everyone, for their attendance here today. We again hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. DRJ would also like to thank our speakers today for their time, as well as Metric Stream for sponsoring today's webinar. We will be emailing everyone a link to the recording of this webinar as well. You may view the recording as frequently as you wish or share it with your peers. If you have any additional questions, please contact Disaster Recovery Journal. Thanks again, and this now ends today's webinar.